Well, welcome everybody to the webinar on how much should I spend on my wedding photography. It's a bit of a bride's guide to what wedding photography costs at the moment. This is based very much around my book that I've written recently called Secrets to Choosing Your Perfect Wedding Photographer. Thanks for attending. What I just want to do is get a hands up from everybody. Make sure that you can hear me loud and clear. So on the little button on your dialog box, what you will see is the little hands up signal. So if you can put the hands up so that I can see that you are all able to hear me. Thank you very much. All right, let's have a little look at the topic tonight. How much should I spend on my wedding photography? We've determined that everyone can hear us, so looking forward to letting you know a little bit about what's going on tonight. All right, who am I? My name is Brett Odgers. I'm one of Australia's top wedding photographers. I've recently, as I mentioned, written a book called Secrets to Choosing Your Perfect Wedding Photographer, and that's based on 20 years or so of brides and grooms coming in and asking lots of questions, and I very much gear what I'm doing around uh, answering questions. It's a very educational process. So I find that throughout the process of interviewing couples and talking about weddings, there's a lot of education involved in there. So what I've done is I've written a book based on that, and you can actually download that. I'll give you the link a little bit later on so that you can have a look at that at our Facebook page. I live in Sydney. I have a wife and 3 children, but I do work all over the world. I actually have a background in advertising and commercial photography, and I've shot advertising campaigns for clients like Coke and Commonwealth Bank and St George Bank and Taylor's Wines and Penfolds and all sorts of interesting things. I do run a boutique studio, wedding studio, and that's called Exquisite Memories Forever. All right, I've got some resources for you to take away that will help you with your wedding photography and planning for your wedding photography. What I'd ask you to do is to post any feedback that you've got on our Facebook page, and same goes for Twitter. Let me just show you a little bit about our Facebook page. So here is our Facebook page. And we've got a few resources on there. If you have a look down around here, I've highlighted some of the aspects that you'll see in the presentation, so that everyone always seems to ask, can I get a copy of those slides? I'd really like to sort of keep a little bit of information. What I've done is I've put it all on the website, on the free wedding book is there as well. So there's a link that you will able to download my book for free. So that's the Facebook page. Jump on there, hit a like, and pop some questions and comments on there. I'll be taking comments a little bit later on. All right, let's go back to the topic at hand. So we've got those resources sorted out for you. Now into how much wedding photography costs. The how much question. It's the number one question that we all get asked. How much? It comes in different forms, such as what packages do you have, or even, just what's the best price you can do. But really, that's the first question that everyone asks. And I always say, why is it that we ask that question? Is it because money is the single most defining aspect of, how we go about choosing our wedding photographer? Is the cheapest photographer going to get the job? Or do we rate photographers by how they cost their work? Do we define our own wedding needs by how much a service we want will cost? Look, I don't really think that it's any of these. Wedding photography is about so much more than that. And in my case, the cost of the wedding photography was in the lost opportunities. I've got an interesting story about my wedding day. I was married 22 years ago, and I wasn't a photographer of the standing that I am now, and I just got my flatmate to shoot the wedding for me. His main qualification was that he worked in a film lab and he was able to process the film. So not a great qualification. And so he set about shooting the wedding for us. We got the wedding photos back, and there were rolls and rolls and rolls of this one particular girl. Clearly, it was a girl that he was fairly enamored with, and he had taken lots of photos of her on our wedding day. About a third of the shots seemed to have her in it. So really, it was the lost opportunity of capturing some beautiful memories on our wedding day. So we really missed out on that. But I actually believe we asked the how much question because really we don't know what else to ask. Purchasing wedding photography is not something that we've done, on a, done before, and we haven't, we haven't got much experience at that. So the only thing we know how to qualify is how much. How much do you charge? I guess someone who charges more is better, or we just don't know what else to ask. So tonight what I'm going to do is give you a whole bunch of other things that you can ask. It's going to give you a whole bunch of resources. Let's start with, what does expensive really mean? It's different for every person on the planet, and it's directly linked to your perceived value of what you're buying and how important that purchase is to you. And I think this is a critical part of working out how important wedding photography is to you, because then that will help determine exactly, how much you're happy to spend on your wedding photography. So expensive is relative at best, and what is much more important actually is your comfort level at spending. If we relate it to purchasing shoes, a bride of mine recently had the most magnificent pair of, crystal encrusted shoes. They were just stunning, and I took some great photos of them, and they were really important to her. But would the price have been important? Would the comfort have been important? I don't think any of these mattered, because she had her dream shoes on her wedding day. Um, you know, that having exactly what she wanted on her wedding day was really the most important thing to her. All right, what are you comfortable spending on wedding photography? This is probably the single most important thing that you need to work out um, for yourself before you go starting to look at wedding photographers. I've got clients whose comfort level is $3,000. I've got others whose comfort level is 6,000, some 15, some even above 25,000. It really does depend on what your comfort level is. And that is a really good starting point for knowing exactly how to budget for wedding photography. My experience is that most couples in Sydney in 2002 seem to have a comfort zone of between about $4,000 and $8,000, depending on what you'd like included in your package. But most importantly is, what do you really get for the money that you've spent? So we're about to look at that. There are a number of ways of measuring what that money is, and looking at different types of photographers is a really good way of assessing what you're going to get for your money. Of course, photographers have different skills, different talent, different quality. They're all going to mean different prices. So I'm going to show you today what the four main areas, or four main sectors, I guess, within the wedding photography industry, and to give you a bit of an idea of exactly how much each of those will cost. Okay, There are four main areas. Number one is part-time or amateur photographers. This often includes student photographers and those that don't have any professionally recognised training. They're usually keen and making a bit of extra money on the weekend. There's semi-professional and mid-range studios and photographers. Often these will be set up in a mall and they'll offer a range of products like portrait sittings, and some may even have a photographic lab attached to them. I see those all the time. Then there's the professional photographers and sort of high-end studios. These are the studios that have years of experience and knowledge in providing great professional standard wedding images, albums, and all sorts of other things. There's a great deal of difference in these studios, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. We've got marquee photographers. These guys are famous and highly regarded photographers whose name carries with it a real value. They often shoot celebrity and society weddings, and their experience and expertise is well earned, and they can justifiably command a higher price for their work. All right, let's have a little look at amateur and weekend photographers. I'm just before I go there, I'm just going to ask if there are any questions. There's a little questions box there that you can put your that you're able to put your questions into. Just type them in there, and they will come up. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear me and that it's all fairly clear. So we seem to be going fine there. No questions so far. All right. Amateur and weekend photographers. So this is a type of photographer that is really non-professional. What I find is that they have an interest or they're enthusiastic about their photography. They'll often even have the exact same camera that I have, but the job they do during the week is kind of dull, and on the weekend they just love getting to be a photographer. In their eyes, it's a very exciting prospect, and they're going to get paid to enjoy their hobby. So it's fantastic. Typical prices for these photographers seem to be between about $800 and $2,000. And it often, won't include albums or prints. They'll just shoot it, burn the disc of images and give it to you, and then you've got, you've got all the images available to you, but you don't have any real way of, handling that. So, look, many couples will see amateurs as an absolute bargain, but what I want you to know is exactly what you're getting, so that you and your expectations are appropriate for this style of photographer. Look, the same goes for friends who have a decent camera. They may have the best intention, but if you place a high value on beautiful wedding photography, you might be a bit disappointed in the results. So let's have a little bit of a look at what the advantages and disadvantages are. The advantages: it's inexpensive. It reduces your financial stress due to an inexpensive package, and who doesn't like that? And you know what? You never know. You might find a future superstar, and you might get great quality photography. I have a friend who did that. They had their beautiful wedding photographs done by what is now a pretty well-known photographer, and they're pretty pleased with that. But look, it's a bit of a risk, and only about 1 in 8,000 amateur photographers will ever graduate to becoming a superstar. You usually do get to keep the images, though, and there's often no restrictions on using the images. So that's not a bad thing. The disadvantages: this is where the rubber hits the road, I guess. They do have a lack of experience, and how that actually translates to you and what that means to you is they just don't have a knowledge of how to handle difficult or different situations that occur both technically and when you're dealing with people and time management. They have a very basic level of creativity, and they often rely on automatic function of their camera to overcome, these technical difficulties. They don't have any guarantees of quality, and they don't usually produce wedding albums. They just shoot and burn a disc. Look, you may have the images from your wedding day, but you have no knowledge of what to do with them or how to use them in order to get, professional results. And reliability can sometimes be a little bit of an issue. I have a friend, um, excuse me, I have a friend who was my next door neighbour, in fact, and his son had booked a wedding photographer, and he said, "Oh, look, they're just so good. I can't not take them. You know, the price was just too good to be true." Well, the week before the wedding, the couple hadn't heard from him, and they rang up and said, "So what's going on?" And he said, "Oh no, I'm not shooting your wedding until the next month." He'd completely got it, wrong. And he said, "Well, I'm sorry, I can't shoot your wedding anymore. I've already booked for that day." And of course, 3 days before their wedding, they were in panic mode. Fortunately, my next door neighbour came over and said, "Are you available?" And of course, I was available, and I sorted them all out, and we got them all sorted. But that's just one of those stressy stories that it's from my experience, and that is one of those disadvantages of the amateur. Look, consistency is a bit of an issue. Amateur photographer, they're kind of transient, and if you don't have the images from your wedding included in the package, they could be difficult to track down in years to come. And I've actually had clients who uh, have lost track of their wedding photographer and can't get their images. Um, Part two to that is that you might have actually seen beautiful wedding images in an ad they've done, or when you visited them, but when it comes to the day, they're less than perfect. It's a really good reason to get an engagement portrait, because that way you really get a chance to see how good they actually are. Amateurs often don't carry insurance, don't even understand why you would need to carry insurance, but basically that's because if anything we do damages anything or anyone on your day, then we're covered for it. And of course, there's no guarantees. So again, because they're inexperienced or part time, they often don't, offer guarantees. So if you're disappointed with the results, you sort of have no real comeback. You have no way to to actually get a guaranteed result. All right, let's look at the semi-professional and the mid-range studios. Of all the wedding photographers that you'll look at, this is the vast majority of them. They're sort of mid-range of the wedding photography. I find their prices will be between about $1,500 and $3,500 for a fairly standard sort of package. This type of studio provides quite a good product at a good price. And because they're often doing higher volumes, they can often provide, mid-range quality at a reasonable price. They often present quite good value for the average client. This is a sector of the wedding industry that does have the highest amount of studios, and therefore they're competing a lot on price. And they're looking at what other people are charging, and they're basically just undercutting each other. This creates a little bit of a cycle where there's a constant downward price pressure on price. And look, you might look at it and think that's fantastic. I can really bargain them down to the smallest possible price. But unfortunately, that's actually not what happens. These, as they reduce their prices, they have to keep reducing their cost of delivering the products to remain profitable. I mean, that's just business. So what they do is they hire less expensive photographers to shoot your wedding on their behalf, or they have less, lower quality albums and all that sort of stuff. It's a real issue. You might save money, but you might not be very happy with what they've actually produced in the end. Some of the advantage of these guys over the amateurs is that they're working at it regularly. This is their full-time job mostly, and they'll have a reasonably good web presence. They're often quite negotiable on price, and they offer a wider range of services than just the part-time photographers. They'll create a wedding album for you, and there's often no restrictions on using the images. So they're quite a good step up from the amateur photographers for not a great deal more money. They are sometimes prone to a little bit of high pressure sales tactics, and their camera craft is not as high as the fully dedicated professionals. So they'll rely heavily on Photoshop to create a look for their studio, and that'll fix any problems they had in the shoot. Sometimes their skill level sort of gets to a certain point and they stop. They don't continue their education, so they are they just go to the basic sort of level, and their lack of ability to technically do something, um, you know, puts them out of their comfort zone. All right, advantages. Oh, I've gone backwards. I do apologise. We are at the disadvantages, and we're moving on to our professional photographers, and especially the top end studios. Look, this type of wedding photographer is a much smaller section of the market, and in truth, it's a section to which I belong. I sort of stand between this and the marquee photographers. I've never worked in either of the other two, but I have taught many people and mentored many people who have worked in those studios, and I'm pretty familiar with it. But this section of the market, they're the professionals. They're the artists, the studios that value quality and customer service and reputation. And these are actually the foundations for which I categorize photographers as professionals. Their typical package prices seem to be between about 4,000 and 7,500. And if your budget can go to this, this is very much where I would recommend that you go looking. These guys and girls are really going to give you good value. In a high-end studio, it's the consistency and quality which are the foundations for their success, because anyone can fluke a shot and have a day when they're in the zone. An amateur can sort of go, oh, this isn't that difficult, when they're like having a totally perfect day. But a professional's learn and practice so that they get the highest quality no matter what the day is like, and they can consistently do that day after day and year after year. That's their guarantee, and that's what separates them from the remainder of the industry. Not just the quality of their last job, but the quality of every one of their jobs. Even within this level, there are varying levels of quality and different styles within this category. I find it's mostly based on the photographer's personal preference in how they want their studio run and what their personal style is. For example, I really like to get to know my clients, and I like to be hands-on throughout the whole time. So in order to do this and have the resources to achieve that quality, that translates for me into a lower volume of clients so that I can, get more hands-on. So my individual cost per wedding may be a little higher in order to maintain that personal approach. But then that's the kind of client who I'll attract as a photographer. I call my studio the boutique or bespoke style of studio. And there's many of us around doing all sorts of different styles. The advantages, well, I could go on about the advantages forever, really. High quality, guaranteed results, consistency, flexibility in preparation, creativity and excellence in every image that they capture. And there's so much to each image that needs to be captured. There's the customer service, and, we just hold ourselves to a higher standard. We've got quality products, high quality prints and albums. We carry insurance. In fact, some wedding reception venues won't allow you in to their wedding reception venue unless you have public indemnity insurance, public liability insurance rather. And so you really need to carry all this to be a professional and to operate professionally. We often shoot overseas and throughout Australia, and we're able to easily produce magnificent results in really exotic locations. The disadvantages, in my opinion, are fairly low. The main disadvantage is it costs more. It's a higher price to have a high-end professional, and because we're kind of in demand, we may not always be available for your wedding date. So my advice is, if you want a photographer who's in this section, jump onto it. Get onto it pretty quick and make a decision pretty quickly. All right. A final category is our marquee photographers. Look, these are photographers who have often shot very high profile weddings and society weddings. They've earned the trust of the rich and famous to do so, and that trust is actually highly valued amongst public figures, and keeping the images out of the public eye is a really important part of our job. I must confess my bias. I do also belong to this group. And I would say the typical packages seem to be between about 5,500 and 8,800 in this sector. Um, Trust is very important in every wedding, but no more so than when you're working, with a marquee photographer. I have a friend who shot J Lo or Jennifer Lopez's wedding, and she had a pretty good magazine deal, as you could imagine, for the rights to publish her wedding photos. The magazine editor asked my friend Joe if he could have a look at how much one of those images would be worth if it leaked. And he came back, he did some research and came back with the figure of $3 million. And of course, it would have spoiled her exclusive deal. So obviously, the non disclosure deals and all that sort of stuff is really, really important. These photographers need to work closely with security, and they're often under quite creatively challenging situations. You can't go out in public, so the paparazzi can't get at you. And there's a lot riding on the photographer's ability to pull it off. So, and to do so while helping the bride and groom have a really good day. So it's quite a challenge. You might not actually hear much about these weddings unless you ask a photographer directly, because we don't tend to advertise them, and often we've signed non-disclosure agreements, especially with society clients. It's really important that we don't let their images get out. So why choose a marquee photographer? Look, if your photographer has shot a celebrity or society wedding, you can be assured that there is nothing they can't handle, even under the most extreme pressure. Their service and results have passed a really high standard. And look, some clients like to say I'm using the same guy that shot so-and-so's wedding, and that might be a reason to book someone, but I really recommend, if you're looking at a marquee photographer, go through the same procedures as everyone else and make sure you'll enjoy having them on your wedding day. It's just as important to talk to them and see that they're going to listen and be the kind of photographer that you want them to be on their wedding day. All right, what does this all mean to you? Choosing an option from the higher levels of the photographic industry means four main things: quality, assurance, security, and a bit of individuality or, creativity. They're things which are really important on your wedding day and very important in a wedding photographer. Quality in everything they do, from customer service, shooting, composing, lighting, right down to the products. That really provides assurance that when you pay your money, you're going to get the result you want. The reason we get paid is to guarantee our results. We guarantee that nothing will go wrong and you'll never be met with any excuses why we couldn't do something that was important to you. That provides a security that you're safe in our hands, and that your precious wedding day memories will be treated with the respect they deserve. I find, I don't have any bridezillas. I've never had a bridezilla. It's one of those questions that I always get asked. And I think that's because of this sense of security. My couples feel completely looked after, and that I have completely got all of their needs in hand, and they know that that's what my role is. So they just relax and enjoy the day. And I think that that's something that's really important. The individuality aspect of it, well, you know what? We're artists and we have a commercial business. You'll see a bit of our personality in our work, and you'll find yourself drawn to that aspect of it. There's enough of us out there with varying approaches to weddings, and you'll find one that suits everyone. If you're hiring a little bit of their talent to be applied to your wedding day, then you can be assured that they'll be striving to create the best possible art that they can for you. Every wedding that I do, I'm thinking, how can I make this better than the last one? How can I make this image the most magnificent image that I can in this circumstance? And, it's a joy to produce that kind of work, I must say. Okay, this is where the rubber hits the road, keeping photography costs under control. There's a couple of ways we can do that. The single most important job that a photographer does for you is to capture the images in a style and approach that tells the story of your day. That's what you need to focus on. Then they present those images through albums, prints, books, and in a way that'll enhance all those memories. How much of what you get them to do will be the most significant factor in your photography budget. So, 5 things you can do to keep your budget under control. Number one, invest in the things that are most important to you. Okay, so if the most important thing to you is getting the photographer of your choice and making sure that they're there to cover the entire day, from preparation up to the reception, then invest that money in getting the best photography you can. And if you want an album, maybe get a modest album, because when you have beautiful images shot by a photographer that you've really enjoyed being with, anything you do with them is going to be wonderful. Don't be tempted by the package that appears to have a lot of stuff in it and is good value. Like my friend who took the package which seemed too good to be true, it was too good to be true. A little tip: if you are getting married on a weekday, like a Friday or a Monday, or in the winter, it is far easier to get the photographer of your choice at an ideal price. They're slower times and we're available. So, exactly the same goes for wedding venues and churches. I know one of the very popular churches here in Sydney is booked out 2 years ahead if you want it on a Saturday. But if you want it on a Friday, a Sunday, or a Monday, you've got a great deal of choice. Don't sacrifice coverage time to get a bigger album. I think that you'll never get those moments back again, and you can always save up for a bigger album. I had a bride once who only booked me for 6 hours, and she came back and said, I'd so wish that I had you there for the extra 2 hours, because all this great stuff happened and we didn't get shots of it, and I really regret doing that. So she actually wanted me to pass on that message to all of you. One of the ways that we help couples get more bang for their buck, or more in their budget, is we offer an album registry for our clients. So instead of getting the toaster that you don't need or gifts that you don't particularly want, guests can contribute towards your wedding album. And we've had couples come back from the honeymoon with sort of $3,000 to $4,000 in their album registry to spend on their wedding album. And it's a fantastic way of doing things. Guests love giving money towards their wedding album. I've been at the wedding and people say, oh, can I give you some more money? I want to put another $100 into their wedding album. And they just love it. It seems to be a really great way of doing things. Look, proof albums are something that's really popular to have in your wedding package. That is a book with all the images in there. But while a printed album is a really good way to go, maybe a digital proof album, it can be made in a browser and you're not having to physically print and produce the book. That's a really great way of keeping the costs under control. Okay. The other thing I thought I'd tell you is some inclusions, like package inclusions, that are quite cost effective. So saving money on your package may mean leaving out some things that have a high production cost to the studio. So, for example, wedding albums just cost a lot of money. They're handmade, they have a lot of labour and a lot of craft put into them, and it's really hard to reduce the price on them because they just cost a lot of money. So what I've given you here is 5 inclusions that you can ask for that don't cost a great deal more to include for us photographers. The actual cost price of these things are not so high, and therefore you can include them at a reasonable sort of price. The engagement or the pre-wedding portraits, this is a great way to build rapport with your photographer and to get some great images that aren't just wedding day images. It's also a kind of a good test run. I have a friend in the UK who's just had an engagement portrait by his photographer, and he was really not impressed with the results. So he's now looking for another photographer to shoot his wedding day. Now, that's a really good thing to find out now rather than on your wedding day. So it's really important. On online delivery. Can your photographer put up a website for you so that your family can view them from anywhere in the world? This is really popular with our studio. We have wedding guests who are from all over the country and sometimes all over the world, and our clients love to be able to get those images up there on the site so that everyone can view them. And it doesn't cost that much. Unframed prints. The thing about photographic printing, what you really want from us is the professional quality printing and retouching. That's the best thing we can give you. If we have to look after the framing and all the rest of it, then that adds costs into the package. If you can sort out the framing yourself, then you'll get a lot more prints included in your package for the same price. The other way to save money is duplicate parents' albums or parents' books. Once the album's made, the cost of producing an exact copy of your parents' album is significantly less. But the thing is, you can't change anything. You can't add or subtract pages in order to save money. So typically, if a wedding album costs $3,000 or $4,000, then the duplicate parents album might only cost 10 to 15% of the cost of that. So it's a huge saving. Wedding books are becoming a real trend rather than the traditional albums. These are beautifully made personal book-bound books. We offer them now instead of traditional wedding albums, and they're fantastic. They look beautiful. They're printed with offset printing technology, so there's a level of mechanization in it, and that's where the cost saving is. But it's still highly customizable, different album cover material, all sorts of different things. But they would typically be about half the cost of a traditional wedding album. So you have the wedding album, but it's not the high cost wedding album. So there's a couple of ways that we can save some money, include some things in the wedding package, which will save you a little bit of money. And this is sort of starting to get around to how much should I spend on my wedding photography? Okay, here's the 4 steps that I recommend that you get stuck into in order to actually determine how much you want to spend. 1, work out how important photography is to you. If it's something that is really important to you, then you really need to look at a higher quality of photographer. If photography is not that important to you, then maybe you can go with the amateur or the lower end photographer. That's knowing what your starting point is the most important aspect. And then number 2, of course, determining what your comfort level is. Then you can go in and have a judgment for what you're looking at. Number 3, you want to know what type of photographer you're talking to. Is it the amateur, the semi-professional, the full professional, or a marquee photographer? Because that's going to determine the prices that you're looking at. And finally, what you want to do is determine what you'd like in your package. Obviously, the more stuff you have in there, the higher your package is going to be. If you just want the coverage, or you want coverage and a modest album, then you're going to be able to keep your budget well and truly under control. Okay, quality isn't just about price. It's everything. It's the service, the artistry, the professionalism, the dedication, and so many more things. Most of all, it's getting the result that you always dreamed of. These are photographs which will live with you for the rest of your life. 22 years later, after I've been married, I really wish that I had known this back then, because my children now would love to see what mum and dad looked like on their wedding day. So, quality is important. And so what I've done is I've produced a photographer's assessment checklist. Now, this is for you guys to use when you go to see or interview a photographer. You can go through and sort of rate them, if you like, I guess, how much you like their photographic style, the quality of images, how well did they understand what you wanted, all that sort of stuff. There's a side for the bride and a side for the groom, and you'll be able to sort of, that'll give you a quality, a quantitative way of assessing how much you liked the photographer. Now, this is actually available to download at my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/exquisite memories forever. So you guys can go to the Facebook page and check that out. All right. Now, if you have any questions that you'd like answered, you can most definitely email me. That's the best email to get me on. That's info@brettodgers.com. And my studio website, if you'd like to know a little bit more about my studio, is professionalphotographers.net.au. I'm very open to if any of you who are on the call today would like to come in for a consultation, or if you're interstate, we can set up a consultation on Skype. If you've got any questions that you'd like to answered that I haven't answered in this webinar, don't hesitate to book in a consultation. I'm really happy to help you out and point you in the right direction. Anything I can do to make your life a little bit easier when you're booking your wedding photographer, happy to do that. All right, that pretty much brings me to the end of the seminar or the webinar, and the next one is going to be all about planning for timing. So I'm going to be going through how you should plan out timing, what typical sort of, how long should I spend, what a typical day looks like, so that when you get into your wedding photography, you'll know what to expect. I'm going to be sending you guys out a link so that you'll be able to register for that next webinar if you like. And look, it's been a delight having you all here. Thank you very much for coming. If you've got any questions, please type them into the question box and I will attempt to answer them. Alternatively, you can ask questions at the Facebook page, which is facebook.com Exquisite Memories Forever. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming, and thank you for listening. Again, I've been Brett Odgers, and I'm the author of the free wedding book, Secrets to Choosing Your Perfect Wedding Photographer. I look forward to hearing from you soon.